So before we get too deep into September, and certainly before we get to October and I start talking about a ton of horror stuff here on the channel, today I did want to go ahead and talk about the games that I picked up in August. So all that being said, let's just go ahead and jump right in with the first game that I picked up that was actually a recommendation courtesy of Gargablarglarg, and that would be Spin Rhythm XD. So like I already mentioned, this was a recommendation from Gargablarglarg, who regularly makes good recommendations, like Tokyo 42 from a couple months back, or Lots I think it was before that, so I'm inclined to trust his judgment. But I was a little skeptical about the candy-coated rhythm game that is Spin Rhythm XD. And not because I don't like the genre, or even that this particular title looked bad or anything, I'm just way more used to playing rhythm games in a more dynamic way, usually through an unconventional control method. Case in point, I was a huge fan of the Guitar Hero and Rock Band series back in the day, and even in the present day I play Beat Saber almost every morning without exception to get the blood pumping and wake myself up after I've had some coffee. So the idea of a rhythm game using just a conventional controller seemed like it might not hit the same way. But I was totally wrong, because Spin Rhythm XD is a really good time that is bolstered by silky smooth controls and an excellent array of tracks that I've played so far. At its most basic difficulty, you need only spin in the appropriate sections using the analog stick or align the correct color with the circles coming down the lane, where you might have to hit the A button as you land on them, or just make sure they're aligned and hit nothing at all. And that initial difficulty feels completely appropriate for new players trying to get acclimated to the experience. If you're a veteran of the genre, you'll probably step up the difficulty immediately like I did, but make no mistake that once you go beyond medium, even if you're old hat at these sorts of games, you're probably going to encounter some difficulty. And I say that as someone who regularly plays Expert Plus, or at least Expert with the speed modifier on for Beat Saber. That's because the higher up in difficulty you go, the more mechanics are introduced that you'll have to contend with. For instance, at medium difficulty you have to not only spin, but also scratch at various sections coming down the lane, and also learn how to hold some notes as they approach. Bump up to hard and it throws in more complex patterns, a beat mechanic that you have to hit with the right bumper button, and hold sections that might also demand a timed release. Thankfully, moving between difficulty modes is pretty approachable thanks to a tutorial that breaks everything down and just makes it really easy whenever you're ready to move up to a stiffer challenge. And even though you can technically fail a song, there's always great incentive to continue to try again since you're constantly leveling up and in turn unlocking new customizations. Not to mention, I don't think I hit a single song that wasn't infinitely danceable and really just a pleasure to engage with. Some tracks are high-energy dubstep, while others are slower, more melodic jams that seem to provide well-placed breaks as you tackle tougher tracks. Performance on the deck is perfectly smooth with no adjustments needed, which you kind of need a smooth experience in a rhythm game since that would be a death sentence if not properly calibrated. But if you're playing on an external display or have a setup that might introduce some lag like I do, thankfully you can adjust the timing and the options if needed. All in all, it's a very satisfying rhythm game to hop into and out of, and I expect that I'll do just that between bigger and more taxing games, so Garga, thanks again for the heads up on this one. And while we're on the subject of absolutely banging soundtracks, this next one is a game that I played and enjoyed thoroughly on the Switch years ago, and I finally pulled the trigger on a Steam copy so I could revisit it just in time for spooky season, and that would be the Mummy Demastered. Based on Universal's now mostly defunct Dark Universe, which started and ended with 2017's The Mummy Demastered doesn't aim to be a movie tie-in that replicates the movie, but rather stands on its own as a crispy 16-bit era Metroidvania. You play as a prodigium soldier under the direction of Dr. Jekyll, and will be facing off against the forces of Princess Amenet. And from a gameplay perspective, it feels like a classic Metroidvania with a little bit of Contra for good measure. So you can expect all of the staples that carries with it, like exploration, secrets, upgrades, new weapons, and hordes of undead baddies to contend with. And it's not just impressive that they managed to cobble together all of the best bits of the genre, but just about every one of these is done exceedingly well. Movement and combat feels great, boss battles are thrilling, and the sprawling map is fun to traverse as you continue to unlock new abilities and means of traversal. Now granted, it can get a little bit frustrating at times thanks to some relentless enemies and vicious platforming in spots, but by and large it mostly stays within the realm of challenging without becoming overwhelming. Also, one twist on the formula is that if you die, you have to gun down your reanimated corpse to reclaim your gear and continue. When I first played this back in 2017, I want to say, the problem was that these reanimated corpses could be so powerful and might appear so far from the last checkpoint that it could be a borderline impossible task to continue. Thankfully, since that initial launch, they rebalanced this mechanic to make their health pools not so intimidating, so that should be a nice reprieve if you, like me, were a little burned on the initial outing for the Mummy Demastered. Returning to it in 2024 feels fantastic, and apparently a lot of players felt the same way, because despite the fact that the Dark Universe didn't really pan out the way Universal had hoped, a sequel to the Mummy Demastered called The Mummy Survives is supposedly in development for a 2026 release. So here's hoping that's true, but in the meantime, if you're looking for some solid Metroidvania action with a stellar presentation, Demastered fits the bill and performance is first rate on the Steam Deck. And again, with Halloween just around the corner, now is as good a time as any to dive into a well-crafted Metroidvania with an appropriately spooky coat of paint. And speaking of Metroidvanias, this next one's a bit of a cheat since it wasn't really a pickup, as Konami were kind enough to kick me a code for it, but I'm sure glad they did because Cygni All Guns Blazing is an outrageously stylish shoot 'em up that I might not have checked out otherwise. And I say that not because I don't like shoot 'em ups, I'm just not very good at them, and it's a genre I really enjoy from time to time, but almost entirely by happenstance. Thankfully, Konami says they designed this to be a more welcoming, kinder entry point into the genre, but after getting absolutely wrecked in it at the start, I am at least a little confused how they can say that. But again, I'm not personally very good at shmups. Thankfully, there is a delightfully retro tutorial you can take advantage of, and believe me, you will definitely want to do that because this is certainly one of the most complicated arcadey action games I've played in a while. Between rebalancing your shields with your weapon resources, toggling homing attacks, and juggling when to use air versus ground attacks, this is a really intimidating game. And I thought I could brave its normal difficulty initially, reasoning that, hey, I'm not that terrible at arcade games, and I still have decades of experience playing games that require twitchy timing, but nope, I got completely wrecked. But I also immediately knew after that first failure that it was entirely my fault for not paying better attention to which attacks I was using at the time, or taking that tutorial level a little bit more seriously. So I did it again, and I failed again, and then I bumped the difficulty down to easy and still had a little bit of a tough time despite making it a little further. And the thing that surprised me about Cygni outside of the incredibly vivid presentation was the raw fun factor. Like, yeah, I kinda sucked at it, but I was having a really good time jumping back in time and again to eke out just a little bit more progress with each crushing bullet-peppered stage. Or rather, I should say section, since I'm still struggling on level 1. And there definitely is a story at play here, and it's told out through some pretty awesome cutscenes initially. I mean, granted, that first one does seem like kind of a thirst trap, but nonetheless, I love when developers put the extra work in for gorgeous cinematics to push a story forward. And I know that has to be an expensive extra to add into a game's development cycle, but it's definitely appreciated. Overall, the Steam Deck performance was good, but not exceptional. By default, it actually has a Steam Deck graphics preset, and I'm inclined to say stick with that. It's not as thrilling or sharp as you get if you tried to further optimize it, but I found that to be kind of a mixed bag. If you ratchet everything up, the frame rate tanks to disastrous levels. Even trying to find a middle ground where I could eke out something closer to, say, a stable 40 FPS was still pretty rough during particularly chaotic sequences, and I even managed to crash the game at one point. So is it a good experience on the Steam Deck? Kinda, but you'll definitely want to temper your expectations, as this is a lot more taxing than you'd assume it might be as a top-down shmup. Still though, I'm really enjoying the difficulty curve and trying to get all of the mechanics drilled into my muscle memory. So if you're a fan of the genre or just looking for some much more challenging arcade fare, it's definitely worth checking out, and thanks again to Konami for the opportunity. Next up, we have a game that I can say with zero embellishment, I promise you I went into 100% blind. I vaguely recall it had been recommended here on the channel, so I looked through the comments, and sure enough, it was brought up to me multiple times, but for the life of me, I had no idea what I was in for when I launched this one. But, as it turns out, it is published by THQ, and is a post-apocalyptic open-world third-person action RPG. And at first, I was really skeptical of this game because it kicks off with a sparsely animated 2D exposition dump that admittedly sounds kind of phoned in. But the setup is that you'll be playing through the remnants of a post-apocalypse that happened on the planet Magalan. After getting decimated by a comet, remaining survivors split up into factions with their own ideologies and feelings surrounding the mysterious resource called Elex, which, in this world, is great for magic, technology, and drugs. So yeah, it's pretty much party central in the world of Magalan. And ultimately, there's just a ton of exposition that kind of fast-tracks you through the setup. And at first, I feel like I wasn't really seeing anything terribly new here, and on top of that, the voice acting could be really uneven, leading to some sort of unintentionally hilarious dialogue. Cap that off with the fact that it's got more than a little bit of jank, which we'll get to in a bit, and I was just not feeling this game. At first. But after the world cracks open a little bit and you get your jetpack and can start exploring the open world, I started really enjoying this one. The combat can feel kind of clunky, but everything else I ran across in this game is really grounded and plays really well. And this game may have come out in 2017, but it feels like a game from 2007, and I mean that in the best way. You can save easily at any time and quickly continue from any missteps, unlocking new abilities and stats is easy to understand, gear you equip shows up on your character, and really just about every subsystem that you'd expect to find in an action RPG like this works beautifully. Things like tracking quests, your inventory and equipment, the map and its legend, they're all rock solid. Spartan, to be sure, and maybe not your cup of tea if you just crave the complexity of something like a true Souls-like, but speaking personally, I love when a game strips out fluff and just mostly nails the fundamentals. And I say mostly because, again, there is some undeniable jank from the literal jump. For instance, it is weird to me that you use X to jump in this game. And also there's just a range of little things that just kind of look and feel odd at the beginning. For instance, right here I noticed that I could pick up arrows from like 10 feet away, which is fine as a matter of practicality, but it does look a little bit weird. And the combat isn't especially flashy, but most of your fulfillment comes from correctly gauging how much stamina you can burn in an engagement, rather than any over-the-top special attacks or anything. Visually it's charming, if not a little bit spotty, and I did notice a fair amount of pop-in, but aside from the occasional bland texture or something, the whole experience runs really well on the Steam Deck. You can ratchet up the quality if you want and still stay comfortably above 30 FPS, or scale it back only slightly to high or medium settings for some of the more taxing effects, and glide past 60 FPS most of the time. And again, overall Elex reeks of mid-2000s game design, and I mean that entirely as a compliment. It's simple, straightforward to a fault maybe, and when it gets going, pretty fun. I mean, maybe it's a little too straightforward in some of its design, but you know what, as one of the most mixed bags that I've played in a while, I'm 100% going to return to the world of Elex because it was just fun despite its blemishes. So if you do take the leap on this one, don't be too put off by that initial narrative ham-fistedness because this is a hidden gem if I've ever played one. And finally, since we are right next to October, let's end this on a spooky note with a game that I randomly came across, the Exit 8. I don't even remember how I stumbled across this game. It might have been a Markiplier video or something, but when I saw the footage, I knew it was exactly the type of game that I would appreciate. Spooky, unnerving, liminal, and just hitting all of the right notes for a really effective horror experience. From the jump, you're given no direction at all, save for a catalyzing event that I won't spoil here that sort of starts informing you of what to do. But it's a pretty straightforward concept. You're trapped in what appears to be a subway station loop. Each time you pass the sign, it's your job to look for anomalies in this one hallway. Sometimes it's something as minor as a door being cracked when it shouldn't, while others are a little, or well, a lot more obvious. If you spot no anomalies, great, continue on your journey and try to make it to Exit A to presumably win the game. But if you do spot something that's out of sorts, that's your cue to haul it back in the opposite direction. It sounds simple, and it is considering the only thing you can do here is look and walk. But the paranoia starts to fold in on itself quickly, and the more time I spent walking or often sprinting through the loop, the more unnerved I became. Were there 4 security cameras on the ceiling before, or just 3? Were those eyes on the poster staring straight ahead, or glancing off to the right? Is that guy looking at me, or is it just my imagination? And just, yeah, nope. It's great fun if you're the sort that likes a well-crafted jump scare, or you just appreciate a gradual building of tension, and this game really shines in that arena. I've always respected developers who can do a lot with a little, and the Exit 8 provides exactly that sort of experience. At first, it runs just okay on the Steam Deck, but if you scale the visuals back to a more palatable medium setting, you'll find the frame rate much improved at the expense of some environmental shine. Which personally I think is a perfectly fine trade-off in most cases, but especially here where the visuals are pretty minimal to begin with. You're not in some sprawling open world or anything, but rather just looping over and over through a confined space. So if you're looking for a short title to put you on edge as we race towards more terrifying fare in the months ahead, the Exit 8 is a steal at $3.99 and a no-brainer if you find it on sale. Alright, and that's it for this one. As always, not every game that I picked up last month, rather just some of the ones that I was most excited to cover, and ones that I thought you might personally find interesting or worth your time. So, all that being said, is there anything great that you picked up in the month of August? If so, I would love to hear about it in the comments. As far as what's coming up on the channel, I will be definitely working on some horror stuff. I might do a vlog of sorts, would be a little road trip thing with the Steam Deck, but we'll see how that goes. And then finally, I think I'm going to do an addendum to the Decky Loader tutorial from the other day. Some people ran into some issues after there was a software update, so I might do like kind of like an extra video that talks about that a little bit, but you know, we'll see what happens. So, as always, thanks so much for hanging out here on the channel. I really appreciate it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.